Well, good morning, everyone. I hope you're all comfortable. Or should I say, I hope at least half of you are comfortable. Because when we move into the keynote portion of our program today, there is visual elements which will be projected on the screen, which means that at least you folks won't be able to see it. So if we could just take a few minutes and maybe shift our bodies over so that we can utilize the screen. No, we're not streaming this. No.
But you wouldn't approve of me like doing that myself.
No, we told people who asked that this wouldn't be streamed because we wanted a live audience for it. So thanks. All right. Everybody settled in comfortably now? All right, now let's get up and move back. Aho, kunamante. See, some of you are polite, and when someone greets you, you greet them back. I don't know what's wrong with the rest of you. We provided coffee, we provided refreshments, so there should be no excuse for your impoliteness. Aho, kunamante. There you go, you're getting it. Ni dijinji makwa, Bear Jacobs. Ni taktalangamau, ni mexicanu, na kakosatawa kunamante, anishik, wewenet. I give you greetings this morning and introduce myself as Bear or Bear Jacobs for the purposes of if we ever meet in real life, please just refer to me as Bear. And I am Turtle Clan, and I am a citizen of the Stockbridge-Munsee Mohican Nation, and with goodness in my heart, I extend my gratitude to each and every one of you who has gathered here today. I must admit, normally I'm a little more polished and refined behind a lectern. There's a fair amount of nerves that are happening right now. Anytime you plan a live event like this, there is the possibility that things go haywire the last second. And so in the interest of full transparency, there's a little bit of haywireness that's happening right now. We are not entirely sure where our keynote speaker is right now. And to that end, I am here babbling and stalling, okay? Well, it's good to be loved, but still. I mean, I must admit, I'm also a little nervous because I recently came across a research study that talked about beauty bias. Do you know what this is? Beauty bias. Yeah, beauty bias is that we are inherently more likely to listen to and receive messages from people that we deem as good-looking, and we are inherently less likely to listen and receive messages from people that we think are ugly. And after reading this research, there's a fair amount of anxiety in my body as I stand up here and I wonder how well my message would be received if I weren't as damn good looking as I am right now. And my heart goes out for the people who are not as beautiful as I am. It's the hat, right? Can you all just, the hat does it, obviously. You've all heard it said that there is no white church, there is no black church, there is no Asian church, there's no Hispanic church. It's just the church. The one church, universal, holy, Catholic, whether that's big C or little c. But it's one church. Now, come on, folks. We know better. We know better that there is not a one church. We know better that for many of our black and brown relatives, that 60 to 90 minutes on a Sunday morning is the only time in the entire week of their existence that they can truly live and be apart from the gaze of whiteness, apart from the social pressure of white supremacy that bears down on all of us. We know that there's Native church. We know that there's Latinx church. We know that there's black church. Come on now. We know that there's black church. And we sure as hell know that there's white church. If there were the hope of the lived-in reality that there would be one church, then race should have never been codified as a social reality hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And we know that whiteness, in its very intimate relationship with empire, found its way into the church very early in this relationship and has been working as a tool for the empire for well over a millennia and a half. So if white church is a thing, which it is, and if white church is harmful, which it is, then those of us who consider ourselves called into the ministry of the gospel, into the ministry of healing and repair, must at our core be about stopping the harm and undoing the structures and systems that have caused harm. And if we're going to do that, we have to acknowledge and we have to name that. And to that end, I want to welcome you to White Church Truths. Today we will be learning from Dr. Michael Emerson about his research of how whiteness has metastasized into our faith communities. This afternoon, we will then hear from clergy and lay leadership of color who have had to spend the entirety of their careers and honestly the entirety of their lives navigating these harmful systems of white supremacy, both inside the church and outside the church. Before we leave this afternoon, we will hear what this whiteness has cost the church. I think I've stalled long enough because our keynote speaker walked in the room. You have no idea. Dr. Emerson, I ran out of jokes about 6 minutes ago, and so I want to invite my colleague and dear friend, Reverend Pamela Ngunjiri. She will bring us our land acknowledgement today.
Good morning. I'm excited to be here with you this morning. I'm Reverend Pamela Ngunjiri, co-director of racial justice. I've been trying to get Jim Bear to agree for us to wear like uniforms, but he won't.
She can't pull off the hat.
Well, the real issue is he said he's not wearing spandex, so. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. But thank you for being here this morning. So, the Minnesota Council of Churches recognizes and acknowledges that we are located on the ancestral homeland of the Dakota people. We are in close proximity to the territories of the Anishinaabe and Ho-Chunk peoples. This land has been cared for and stewarded as a living relative by the Dakota for at least 11,000 years. Beginning in 1805 and extending into the mid-19th century, the United States government effectively stole this land from the Dakota people through a series of unjust treaties and broken promises. What followed were targeted efforts of genocide, ethnic cleansing, and forced removal. As a faith-based organization, the Minnesota Council of Churches recognizes our complicity in these matters. The United States government carried out this injustice often in partnership and cooperation with institutionalized churches. The trauma of forced assimilation and the boarding school system is a stain that cannot be washed away. But we can repent of that past and turn towards a more just future. We look now at the Dakota people, and indeed all of Minnesota's Native American community, as examples of resilience, resistance, and strength. We stand resolute in our commitment to oppose any threat to indigenous culture or tribal sovereignty, be it political, industrial, or religious. We were wrong. We can do better. We will do better. Thank you.
At this time, I want to thank our wonderful hosts for this venue space. Westminster Presbyterian is a community and congregation that has been dear to my heart for a number of years now, ever since I stood behind that podium with my knees shaking for the first time, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, and wondered why in the world did I ever feel I was called to do this work in this kind of space. This is an intimidating space. If you're like a fledgling preacher for one of the first times behind a pulpit, but I have been received wonderfully, beautifully, and welcomed by this church and this community. And I would like to now welcome to the lectern Reverend Alanna Tyler from Westminster Presbyterian Church to just give us some words of welcome.
I was here and he more than rose to the occasion. We have been very grateful for both Reverend Pamela Ngunjiri and for Reverend Bear Jacobs and their willingness to befriend us and help us learn our way forward. We also give thanks for the Reverend Dr. Curtis DeYoung, and we welcome also our keynote. Thank you for being here. We are just grateful that we could have you all here. So welcome to all of you for this significant event. As Jim Bear said, I am Alanna Simone Tyler, and I serve as the Associate Pastor for Justice and Mission here at Westminster. This faith community is honored to open our building for truth-telling and for discussing how we can begin to repair what we have broken. My staff colleagues are here, and we are eager to help you find your way through the building. So just find one of us, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have. This sanctuary has been a container for prayers, for worship, for big ideas, for small revelations. We have had diverse voices here from many different traditions. And as I welcome you into this space, I thought it important to call in some voices from various traditions that we would benefit from their wisdom. And so that we would have a good day of practicing, having conversation, and making commitments to do hard things. So I call in James Baldwin, who said, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." And I call in our sibling, John O'Donohue. May our minds come alive today to the invisible geography that invites us to new understanding, to break the dead shell of yesterdays, to risk being disturbed and changed. I want you to feel welcomed here. I want you to feel welcomed in all of your anxiousness. And so I want you to seize the opportunity as I call in one more voice, that of Joy Harjo. "Seize this day, call your spirits back," she writes. "It may be caught in corners and creases of shame, judgment, and human abuse. You must call in a way that your spirit will want to return. Speak to it as you would a beloved child. Welcome your spirit back from its wandering. It may return in pieces, in tatters. Gather them together. They will be happy to be found after being lost for so long." Welcome to Westminster.
Excuse me for 1 second. Everyone smile. Thank you. If you grew up in the kind of churches that I did, I mean, you can't do anything without music. Am I right? We are so incredibly blessed to have the singer and musician that we have with us today. I will start with the accompanist. It's such a hard word to say. The guy on the piano, Billy Steele. If you grew up in the churches that I did, the Steele family is very familiar to you. And Mr. Steele, I am incredibly honored just to be sitting in the same room with you, and I look forward to what you will offer us today. Singing for us today is Tonia Hughes Kendrick. I have had occasion to hear her sing a few times, and every time I have been moved, just like I was sitting back in my Pentecostal church in the back row because I was a bit of a rebel, but felt the presence of the Spirit as she moved in and through our bodies. And so, please make them feel welcome.
I think you know this one. You can help me if you want to. Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine, and oh, what a foretaste of glory divine, heir of salvation, purchased of God, born of His Spirit, I've been washed in His blood, and this is my story, yeah. This is my song, I'm praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, yes it is. This is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. Well, perfect submission, perfect delight, and visions of rapture now burst at my sight. Angels descending you can? I got a big mouth, but I couldn't hear myself. But I just want to sing one more song, which I think speaks to why we're here. You know, we all have gifts, and sometimes we think they're insignificant because some feel small or some bigger than others. But I think God uses ordinary people, and He brings all of our gifts together, and that is why we're here, to be used of God and for Him to make something beautiful for why we're gathering. Amen. All right, so hopefully you can hear me? I cannot hear myself. Okay, just ordinary people God uses, plain ordinary people. He chooses people just like me and you, who are willing to do as He commands. God uses people who will give their all, no matter how small your all may seem to you. Oh, because little becomes much when you place it in the Master's hand. Just ordinary people. My God uses plain ordinary people. He chooses people just like me and you, who are willing to do everything He commands. He chooses people who will give their all, no matter how small your all may seem to you, because a little becomes much when you place it in the Master's hands. Oh, well, just like that little lad who gave Jesus all he had, as the multitudes were fed with the fish and the loaves of bread. What you have may not seem much, but when you yield it to the touch of the Master's loving hand, then you'll understand why your life may never be the same. Just ordinary people. Our God uses plain ordinary people. He chooses people just like me and you, who are willing to do everything He commands. He chooses people who will give their all, no matter how small your all may seem to you, because a little becomes much when you place it in the Master's master's hands.
Can we give another hand to the musicians? I have the distinct honor this morning of introducing our speaker. Dr. Michael Emerson, PhD, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, is professor and department head of sociology at the University of Illinois, Chicago. He is the author of 15 books, several of which have won national awards and over 100 other publications. Most of his work focuses on the intersection of religion and race in the United States. His latest book, The Grand Betrayal, The Agonizing Story of Religion, Race, and Rejection in American Life, will be published next year. His talk will draw on findings from this book. He currently serves as chair of the leadership team of his local church and resides in Chicago, but he is a native of Minnesota. So after our next musical selection, then we will hear from our keynote speaker, Dr. Michael O. Emerson. Amen. Thank you.
I then shall live as one who's been forgiven. I'll walk with joy to know my debts are paid. I know my name is clear before my Father. I am his child, and I am not afraid. So greatly pardon, I'll forgive my brother. The law of love I gladly will obey. I then shall live as one who's learned compassion. I've been so loved that I'll risk loving too. I know how fear builds walls instead of bridges. I'll dare to see another's point of view. And when relationships demand commitment, then I'll be there to care and follow through. Your kingdom come around and through and in me. Your power and glory, let them shine through me. Your hallowed name, oh, may I bear and honor the bread of life. Oh, may I share with honor, and may you feed a hungry world through me. Amen. Amen. Amen.
Good morning. They're going to set up. It'll take a couple of minutes, and that's okay because I got a few introductory comments. But the presentation is greatly enhanced if you can see this screen. So I know I was sitting over there. I didn't even know the screen was there, and I was wondering, when does the screen come down? But it doesn't. So first of all, thank you for that beautiful music. God has, yeah. One of the gifts, as we had mentioned, God gives us different gifts. Music, singing, or playing instruments, I have zero gift. And I have tried so many times. And one time in church, I was feeling the Spirit, and I forgot that I can't sing, and I just started belting out. And my wife literally went, So, again, we all have gifts. Hey, so you heard that I am originally from Minnesota. Actually, I was born in Chicago, but we moved here when I was very young. My parents are from here, and graduated high school, went to college in Chicago, came back, worked here many years. We had all of our 4 children here. This is home. 2 of the 4 live here currently. I just want to tell you an interesting thing about my parents. So my mother is Italian and my father Norwegian. And so when they were going to name me, I'm their firstborn, my mother said, I have the name, because it's a family name. Carmelo Angelo Emerson. And my father said, no, that's too ethnic. So they went back and forth, and my mother said, I have it. Michael Angelo Emerson. Father said, that's better, but still too ethnic. So they went back and forth, and then had to settle on a decidedly unethnic middle name. My middle name is Olaf. So. Only in Minnesota, right? Okay. Well, thank you for being here on a Saturday morning. It's a heavy topic, this title, The Grand Betrayal, right? It's not a happy title, but let's talk about it. And the subtitle here, How and Why Some White Christians Are Rejecting Their Family. So, if you think about back like when Obama was elected, there was a lot of hope. And when you look at Time Magazine, Newsweek, and online everything, there was these new terms being thrown around. Post-racial society. We had moved beyond race. And the election of our first black president was evidence. And so there was a lot of hope at that time. I was a bit of a pessimist, wondering how one election could suddenly cast race off. But that was really kind of the feeling in the nation. But then the things that have happened right here in Minnesota, as we know, and elsewhere have been real gut punches to that hope. So the question is, why do race and racism not go away? I argue they shapeshift, but they don't go away. And why would that be? What I'm going to argue here today is that racism and racial injustice are actually a life-giving force for a dominant people group's religion. That's a big claim, but let's say that again, that it's actually what feeds a particular religion that I want to introduce to you today. What it's doing, of course, is causing deep, deep damage and trauma, ripping our nation apart, and has been for a very long time. And that's why it's the grand betrayal, because it's family against family. Okay, I'm going to pull on some data. So we've spent the last 4 years studying across the nation race and religion in the United States. So one of the ways that we studied is that we did a big national survey. Now, we did many other methods, but it's easiest just to show you some of this data and these results. So one of the things that we did is in this survey, which was taken online, it's a nationally representative survey of about 3,000 Americans, is we define a term, and you're going to see this over and over today, white practicing Christian or practicing Christian. Sometimes we'll compare different groups. So let me be clear what I mean by practicing Christian and why I use that term. So we define practicing Christian as people who say they're Christian, people who say their faith is extremely important to them, and people, the third requirement, is that they attend worship at least once a month. Now, initially, we were going to look at kind of conservative Christians, mainline or progressive Christians, and Catholics. But on this stuff I'm going to show you today, there wasn't any difference between those groups. So what was different was their racial group, not that they were Christian of a different types. You know, we have these kind of three main types: Catholic, mainline, conservative. Those used to matter. When I first started writing 20, 25 years ago, they mattered. They're not mattering as much anymore. So that's why I'm going to use that term. Okay, so one thing that we did is we asked folks, as you can see, should the Bible be used to determine what is right or wrong? So do you have any water, by the way? That would be great. Only if they said yes, always, the Bible should be used to determine right or wrong. And about half Christians, a little over half, say that they agree with that, yes. So only for these next couple of questions, we've narrowed the pool to people who say yes to this. Okay. Then what we did is if they said yes to it, we presented them with some basically quotations from the Bible. So in the system of laws that God gave the Israelites to follow, there were laws that protected foreigners from being treated unjustly. And we had in there, as you can see, the actual biblical verse, and it was hyperlinked, so if they wanted to see if it actually said that, they could click on it. And then what we would do is restate basically what it said. So it says, therefore, it's good to have laws that protect foreigners from being treated unjustly. All right, so there's 4 of these. The second one, in the Bible, the prophet Nehemiah confessed sins committed by himself, his nation, and his ancestors. Therefore, it's good to confess sins committed by me, my nation, and my ancestors. The first Christians listened to complaints of an ethnic minority group that was being treated unjustly and empowered leaders within that majority group to correct the injustice, out of Acts 6. Therefore, it is good, and we restate it. Fourth question. In the Bible, the Apostle Paul taught that people should not use unwholesome words. Therefore, it's good not to use unwholesome words. All right, so you can see that these first 3 questions are different than the fourth. The first 3 are asking about benefits of other groups. The verses are about benefits for other groups or confessing your own group's sin. So they're kind of communal verses, right? Whereas the last question is our control question. It's individual action or really kind of personal piety. So different than the other 3. So what did we find for practicing Christians? So for those first 3 questions, the majority of African American and Hispanic strongly agreed, but only 1/3 of white practicing Christians strongly agreed with those Bible verses. And keep in mind, we're only looking at the folks who said you should always use the Bible to determine right or wrong. So the reason we needed a comparison is just to see if there's something different when it's not about other groups or confessing your own group's sin. And in that case, this fourth question about not cussing, basically, the majority of all Christians agreed that you shouldn't do that. And they all agreed with that one. Okay, and I just want to point out, I don't talk about Asians right now, I will, but at no time do we have enough cases for Native responses. There's only about 48 folks. And so when we do our next round of research, we are going to correct that, but that's why you won't hear anything in this presentation about that. Okay, this will be the most complicated slide, so I'll try to explain it as clearly as possible. It's only complicated because I'm comparing two variables at once, two questions at once. So one question is, Christians are now discriminated against in this country. And then we're comparing it to, we should have laws to protect immigrants from being treated unfairly. So from now on, we're no longer talking just about the people who say the Bible should always be interpreted literally. We're going to look at practicing Christians in general, so it's a bigger pool. So for African American and Hispanics, about half, somewhere about half, say that Christians are now discriminated against, and about half say we should have laws to protect immigrants from being treated unfairly. So the difference between the two, very small. For Asians, again, about half that Christians are discriminated against, but only a third saying we should have laws to protect immigrants. So we have a difference of 16 percentage points. For white Christians, they're the most likely, about 2/3 say we're the ones discriminated against, and only about 1 in 5, 22%, say we should have laws to protect others. So you get this massive gap of 42 percentage points. We had a question, the U.S. has been oppressive to minorities, so just not asking about currently, but in the past. All right, so about 75% of African American practicing Christians agreed, over 60% of Hispanics practicing Christians, but less than 40% of white practicing Christians agreed that we've ever had oppression racially in our country. In 2019 is when we first went into the field and did this survey, and we asked the question, do you think the United States has a race problem? And so we are here reporting just for two groups, but we could do it for the others, but to keep it simple, the percent that agreed that we have a race problem, we definitely do. So 38% of practicing white Christians compared to 78% of black Christians. Now, because you all live here, you know what happened in May of 2020 and then what ensued over the next few months. And so we thought it very important to go back and do the survey again. And so we did it 1 year later, the late 2020, sorry. Oh yes, water, thank you so much. I want to take a sip before I show you what we found. They think I'm really thirsty, I got 2 full glasses. Okay, look what happened. After everything that was on the news constantly, less practicing white Christians then thought a year later we had a race problem. And of course, for black practicing Christians, it went up for all the other groups. So it was only for white practicing Christians that less after everything of that year. We'll come back to why that might be. Okay, I'm combining here 9 different questions, and I'm doing that because they all gave us the exact same results. So do you think, and they would be asked about Asians, African Americans, Hispanics, and this would be for all people, that they're treated less fairly in hiring, in pay, promotions, housing, mortgages, criminal justice? Those are all separate questions, but putting them together. So we found that the majority of Asians, African Americans, and Hispanics, whether they're Christian or not, agreed that is the case across all of those variables. Half of non-Christian whites agreed. But one group stood alone, white practicing Christians, where 2/3 or more disagreed with those statements. Do racial minorities use racism as an excuse for economic inequalities? The majority of all groups disagree, except one, white practicing Christians. Yeah, you're getting to see the pattern here. Over 70% agreed that's what actually happens. Should people from minority groups work their way up without any special favors? The majority of all groups of color disagree. It was about half and half for non-practicing Christian whites, but over 2/3 of white practicing Christians agree. Again, standing alone, a group distinct unto itself. Generations of slavery. These are all questions that we're asking respondents to answer. Generations of slavery and discrimination have created conditions that make it difficult for African Americans to work their way out of the lower class. Again, you probably can start guessing what we're going to find. Majority of all groups, including non-Christian whites, agree, except one group, white practicing Christians. Over 60% disagree that that's the case. For only one group, does the majority believe that the American way of life needs protecting from foreign influences? White practicing Christians. For only one group does the majority believe we should have stricter limits on the number of legal immigrants. For only one group does the majority believe that some cultures have inherently better morals than others. Can you imagine that? White practicing Christians are the only group that majority say that's correct. Only one Christian group does not believe that race relations, this is very interesting, can be improved by teaching about race in church. White practicing Christians, a full 2/3 say that is not the answer. So what is the answer? Convert people to Christianity. And that's the only group, white practicing Christians, that say that's the answer. Yeah, it's been... All right. Unlike any other group where there are no differences, white practicing Christians are twice as likely than other whites to say being white is extremely important to how they think about themselves. Twice as likely to say they often feel the need to defend their racial group. And this one I think is a real stinger. Twice as likely to agree that it is acceptable for whites to have more wealth than other people. We can put together as a racial prejudice index combining 15 different questions, such as I'm fearful of other races, and what do we find? The highest scoring group by far is white practicing Christians. Again, if I break it down into white conservative Christians, white mainline Christians, white Catholic Christians, they're the three up here, and everybody else is below that, far below that. So one of the things that we do as sociologists is we have fancy statistical methods to say, well, could it be that it's not really religious faith, it's whether you're Republican or Democrat, or whether you're living in the West Coast or the South, or anything like that. So what I'm saying at the bottom here is that we've done all that hard work. It isn't explained by political affiliation, or where people live, or their age, or their education, or their income, or their gender, or other factors. What stands out is, are you a white practicing Christian? We also did ask questions about feelings. So we had 5 phrases, so I'll show you them. So one is white privilege, and we gave them a list, as you can see here, and they could select the 3 feelings that they experience. And if they didn't see what they wanted there, they could write in what they wanted. So white practicing Christians here expressed more positive emotions than any other group when they saw the phrase white privilege. The others are a little bit different, right? Black power, social justice, undocumented immigrants, reparations. White practicing Christians had more negative emotions than other groups. And when you multiply it by the number of people, we're talking millions and millions of more negative emotions within the group white practicing Christians about these phrases than for the other groups. I told you they could write in things too, and they did often. Usually, I'm just summarizing here, like the number one thing that people wrote if they were white practicing Christians was angry. I'm angry. This makes me angry when I see those 4 terms there. Disgusted, idiotic, aggravated, irritated, send them back. A number of these Christians who told us don't use unwholesome words, then used unwholesome words. And then a lot of not guilty, kind of, it's not my fault. So the question is, what's going on here? Hopefully you can see there is a consistent difference. So the question is, why do practicing Christians, white practicing Christians, why are they different, even from other white persons? What's going on? It's not necessarily just because they're white, right? So here's our answer. We actually think there's a different religion operating, and that everything I've shown you is entirely consistent with this religion. We're calling it the religion of whiteness. And that different religion disguises itself in churches. It disguises itself as being Christian, but it's not. It's a different religion. By the way, I just finally got our publisher, it's Oxford University Press, to agree to publish the book, but they made me take out Jim Bear. I can't say that these folks aren't Christian or practicing Christian. I have to say that's a distortion, as you see on here. So my white editors are telling me what I can and can't say about this. So I'll just say that in case they're watching this video. All right. Now, here's what we found empirically. And we did extensive analysis with all kinds of fancy methods. And the data was very clear that 2/3 of white practicing Christians, whether you think they're also practicing Christianity, are practicing this thing called the religion of whiteness, which I'll describe in a moment. 2/3. So we are talking about tens of millions of Americans. So let me just be real clear. This term whiteness can be used in all kinds of contexts. I want to say what we're meaning by it. And it's just very simple. It's white people, and then you can have other backgrounds and support it too, but white folks and the dominance that they have kind of globally for the last few hundred years. So if we get a little bit more detailed, it's to imagine, right, that white is the norm and everything else is not, or it's measured against that, kind of the right to be superior, so theologically. You know, if you think about it, right, there's theology, and then there's black theology, and native theology, and womanist theology, and they're all the aberrations. Theology, we never say white theology, it's just theology, and then there's all the aberrations. So this is part of that. And it's that power, that feeling of being central, a group having that role, that will contribute to this thing that we're saying is worshipped. Okay, so why is it a religion? So all religions have four main things. They have sacred symbols that are used to represent the faith. They have beliefs, and they have practices, and then they have a particular social organization. So I'll just look at the first three. What are the sacred symbols of the religion of whiteness? They are a white Jesus, a merging of the cross and flag, and then growing ever more is firearms. So these representations are Jesus. These are not in the religion of whiteness. And you can read as people's posts and everything when there's attempts to portray Jesus like this. The religion of whiteness followers get angry, they mock it because that's Jesus. More and more in lots of churches and elsewhere, we see this where the cross and the flag are becoming basically the same thing until they are the same thing. This is actually my father-in-law's yard, just to be honest. And then a lot of times these things go together. So I don't know if you can see, but one man's wearing a shirt and it says family, faith, friends, flag, firearms. These are the 5 things you don't mess with. So what do the firearms represent? They represent, in this religion, freedom. They are the symbol of freedom, as defined, but also sort of the mark of dominance, and then they can be a threat when needed. Until Jesus is American and American is Jesus. But Jesus must be white, of course. So I just want to give you the 6 beliefs and the 5 practices, and then we'll figure out how to respond to this and hopefully have some discussion. Okay, so obviously one of the beliefs is going to be an absolute commitment to whiteness, so it will be defended when needed. That, interestingly, God is on the side of the dominant group, the world's winners. And it's kind of what we say a tautology, a circular argument. How do you know that you are with God's favor? Because you have lots of things. Why do you have lots of things? Because you're in God's favor, and it's just like that, right? Whiteness is universal. This one probably is the most essential. So let me explain it. Since whiteness is normative, but it's unseen, we know that Jesus is universal. Jesus came for all people. But Jesus is white. We've already established that. So that means that the universal is white, and the white is universal. So it becomes a self-evident reality once you accept that Jesus is white. Then you center white understandings, theology, values, and actions, but they're not white because they're universal. So they just become understandings, theology, values, actions. You've heard a lot probably in the news about white Christian nationalism. That's one of the beliefs here, a fusion of Christian symbols with American civic life, and an allegiance to an American, go back to 3, whiteness is universal, really a white identity. Somebody asked me, like, well, can you not be patriotic? Sure. Patriotism is support and honor of your nation. White Christian nationalism is honor, support, defending a tribe, a particular group of people within a nation against others in your nation. And then finally, a doctrine of black inferiority. I choose this very carefully because the main foil for whiteness, you need an opposite. For whatever reason, probably because of our history, African Americans were chosen as the opposite, and then every other group basically has to figure out where they fit into that, including natives. But basically, anybody who's not white or honorary white is othered in one way or another. So what are the practices? One is a highly selective use of Christian biblical scriptures. Remember how I started the talk where we looked at biblical scriptures? That was actually a test designed to see if this is the case, and it was the case. So that does happen. It's defending and saying we are a people of the book, but selectively being a people of the book. Okay, epistemology of ignorance. So epistemology means how we come to know. So this is saying how we come to not know. Do you remember where we saw that a certain percent of white practicing Christians in 2019 said there was a race problem in our country, and then we had full display of racial problems in our country, and less thought we had a race problem a year later? That's this. The epistemology of ignorance is an achievement that white folks practicing this religion have used for centuries now to not know something, to deny something. It's how people actually come to not know. And it's a practice to defend. I'm in my 32nd year of teaching undergrads sociology. So one of the classes I teach is race and ethnic relations. For 32 years, it hasn't changed. White students come into my class, we talk about the things going on in race and ethnic, and they say, how come I didn't know this? I wasn't aware, nobody told me about this. How is that possible? That's the epistemology of ignorance. It's not like they were themselves doing it, but they were kept from it, partly by where they grew up, where they were sent to school, and things like that. Of course, the veneration of these sacred symbols that we explored. Fourth is actively protecting whiteness. So in the book, we go into great detail of what happens when there's a push for racial change and how folks of this religion push back. One of the things we found in our data is that religion of whiteness followers are divided into 2 very clear groups. 3/4 are what we call the white veil. So the white veil folks, they constantly say there is no race, there is no white privilege, there are only people. There is no race, there is no white privilege, there are only people. But 25% are what we call the white soldiers. They're the ones, when there's pushback, they're on the front lines defending the faith. Okay? And then finally, opposing Christians of color and other whites. By the way, whites who won't bow to this religion pay a deep price. And we have a whole chapter just on whites who have decided they're not going to bow. And a lot of them, including some right here in Minneapolis, end up getting fired, ostracized, so badly, by the way, that they've had to leave and move to a different metro area to try to start over. It's really sad what goes on. Okay, so now what? What would we do with this? All right, so we all familiar with this. I had to use this today, and the reason I was late is because it steered me wrong and took me to a church a couple blocks away, and I'm trying to get in, and everything's locked up, and I was like, wow, there's not much going on here, but anyway. Okay, so we all know how the GPS works, right? And it says to us, for example, go down 12 blocks and then take a left, go 6 blocks. But if we go down 2 blocks and then take a right and go 14 blocks, it doesn't say, you idiot. It says, recalculating. And I can just keep taking wrong turns, and it will just keep saying recalculating and trying to get me to the end point. Because it's a computer, it doesn't really get frustrated like a human would. Well, to me, that's if you think about that in religious terms, that's God, right? Recalculating. We're always going off course. And God just could get furious with us, but keeps saying recalculating, trying to get us to the right spot. So I think there are four priorities here in this recalculation. First of all, we need to make clear the destination. If we don't know where we're trying to get to, then we're not going to get there. So what is the Christian life? What does it mean to be a Christian? A lot of times we don't want to talk about that because we don't want to sound exclusionary, but I think we do ourselves a disservice by not being able to have some definition of what it is. And then what is a Christian community? How do we live together as it's described by Jesus in community, which is essential? We're going to have to address the betrayal trauma. We have only maybe a chapter and a half in the book, but the devastation that has been left by this religion, and I'm sure it's happening today and will happen tomorrow, of people just being ripped. So what I mean by betrayal trauma is when people or institutions on which we would depend and trust significantly violate that trust. So we can experience trauma when somebody close to us betrays us, but when a whole institution, a whole seemingly faith, Christianity, for example, and I'm trying to say the problem is that we see it as Christianity when it's a different religion, but we have so many stories of people leaving the faith entirely because they're destroyed by what happened to them in churches or what they've seen happen within the faith. So we need to map a new path as the third thing. It has to be led by Christians of color. And the goal will be to root out this religion of whiteness somehow, some way. It can't be allowed to be within Christendom. And so we'll have to coordinate ministries across denominations, across our race and ethnic differences, across other affinity groups. The mission is just too large to try to do it separately. And I know this is hard, but that's actually, to me, that's the sign when we are the Christian church, when we are working again together across whatever earthly differences we have. There you go, John 17. So let me finish with this. This actually comes from an African-American prayer book, that God will swallow up death itself. Evil cannot endure. So we will dream and faithfully serve as we wait. That is our call. We're called to the ministry of justice and reconciliation in whatever context we have, and this is the context that we have been given. And I truly believe this, and maybe we can talk about more later, but I think God is doing a massive sifting in our nation, in our Christian churches, and I think we're being called to a reckoning. We're not going to look the same in 10 years as we do now. So I will stop there, and thank you very much. Okay, the boss says take a couple of questions, if there's any. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, so that's one of the practices called the epistemology of ignorance. So the idea is the more pressure there is for racial change and the more in the face and evident racial injustices, the more you will say it is not there. And that is an effective practice, just to say, I don't see it. So that's what we would have predicted would happen, and that is what happened, only for the group practicing that religion of whiteness. Yes, and then I'll be here. Yeah. Okay. So the demographics, she's saying, are coming to a tipping point where whites will no longer be majority. Did you want to? Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So the question was, okay, yeah. We're living in a time it's coming close to a demographic shift or tipping point. Officially, it's supposed to happen in about 20 years, where the majority of people in the United States are no longer labeled or identified as white. So what then? Two things. When you study the history of what it means to be white, so my grandparents from Italy came here in the 1920s, and I saw what they wrote on their, when they entered. My grandparents had to write what race they were, and they wrote white. It was crossed off by the clerk, and it was a different label put there called swarthy. And swarthy, actually, if you look in the 1920s, was a racial category. It meant you're not white, but you're not African American. So they came swarthy, but now they're white. So whiteness is very flexible. It will typically do what it needs to do to maintain its power and influence. So demographically, it'll expand when it needs to expand. It will expel when it needs to expel. If we need Asians to be honorary whites, they will be until we don't want them to be. Yeah. There's a hand here and then back there. I see lots of hands, but I'll try to get to them. Okay, you want to do it? Okay.
Okay. So my question is on recalculating in your 4 priorities, and you had in there, which means for me, solutions, map a new path, led by Christians of color. Why can't Christians in this room who are white, why can't we help lead this?
Yeah, because part of being white has been defined as we lead. So we need to show that we're willing for real change by saying we will be led. We will contribute, we will do whatever it takes, but we won't. Yeah. Thank you for the question. Yeah.
It's a follow-up on the honorary white comment. You said it a couple times. Can you define that, please?
Yeah. So we use that term a lot in my own field. Honorary white means you're not quite white, but you are considered as like an example to the other racial groups of how you should strive to be. So typically, a lot of Asian groups are labeled that, but not only. That's what it's meant by honorary white. Mm-hmm.
Would you please restate your 3 points of white practicing Christians? Thank you.
Yeah, why don't we just go find it here? Is this what you meant, the sacred symbols? Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Okay, how do we define white practicing Christians or practicing Christians? And then we, of course, add race into that. So practicing Christian means 3 things. It means, first of all, that you say when asked, I am a Christian. So you identify that way. Second of all, that you say, my faith is very or extremely important to me. They had some different options, but they had to say that. And then third, that they are actually attending at least monthly. Yeah.
I don't know if there's a short answer to this, but can you say why it is that Christianity has been where this religion of whiteness has indoctrinated itself? How did that get to marry each other so easily?
Yeah, so it's not an easy answer. We do explore it in the book. And it goes back to England, and we had some very influential philosophers who started to play theologian. Locke, Hume, people like that. And they started to delve in their philosophy into theology and make statements about what the church is about. For example, one of them is that the church is only about individual salvation. That idea that came to the United States came from philosophers like Locke, Adam Smith, people like that. So there's that development. So what ends up coming to these shores is already a version of Christianity completely comfortable, in fact, expecting to be segregated, to see difference, to see white as superior.
Dr. Emerson, could you go back to the beginning of when you talked about the survey? Just give us a little bit more context. When was the survey done?
Yeah.
And to whom was it put out? That sort of thing. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So this survey first was done in late summer of 2019. And so it's a random sample of adult Americans age 18 or over. You randomly sample, we sample about 3,000. And then we use statistics to make sure that we can estimate with clarity and confidence the results for all people that we're talking about. We then did it again 2 more times, late summer of 2020 and late summer of 2021. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Dr. Emerson, I've been struck for decades about what feels like an idolatry around the market, the free market, the way we've implemented capitalism, especially in the US. Is that sort of a necessary condition for some of this, or a reinforcing, or is it one of those tautologies, again, that you accumulate the goods? Could you comment on that?
Yeah, I appreciate that. There's a growing term called racial capitalism, and it's the idea that capitalism itself needs race, and race then feeds on capitalism. So that's where you find the greatest expression. So yeah, in a way it is, again, a circular thing, but they do seem to feed on each other. And again, we can tie it back to some of the things, especially Adam Smith and his argument of this invisible hand. If you remember ever reading about him, that basically it's kind of a way to say God guides this, so there are winners and losers, but overall capitalism will produce more wealth for everybody, and so don't interfere with it. Yeah, so.
Yes, Dr. Emerson, can you comment on how you would see the church's doctrine of discovery and the role that that played?
Thank you. So doctrine of discovery, if you're not aware, but maybe most of you probably are, a series of papal bulls, papal rulings, where the Pope said, essentially, any land that is out there that isn't full of Christians, you have the right and the obligation to take, and take forcefully. If they don't convert to Christianity, whatever peoples you find, then you can take their things, their land, and move those people on. And that was, so when you see people like Columbus and things going out, they truly think they're doing the Christian thing. And so that's the series of this doctrine of discovery that we actually outline this in the book a bit. We still have rulings from the Supreme Court all the way up. I think the latest was 2018, where they referenced the doctrine of discovery for why some white owners of land in New York, up New York State, could keep the land. There was a counter lawsuit by some natives for the land. So yeah, it's been the very start of the total global change that we now see.
My question is, since sociology tells us that if a person holds very strongly a factual error, and they suffer in belief of that factual error, that even when presented with the truth, they will double down and they will not give up their factual error. How do we reach our white Christian brethren who seem to be in this situation?
That is such a great question. Yeah, because, so I'm in the field of education. The idea is, hey, if you just come and learn, then it will all get better once you find the facts. And it doesn't work that way at all, just like you said. We're more invested in our way of life, our identity. And so that's what's really being challenged here. And the pushback is amazing. I've given a couple of talks on this, and like if this was being recorded and goes on the internet, then I will get lots of hate mail and death threats and all those things, because I'm threatening, just by saying these things, you threaten a people's way of life and their identity. So I don't have the simple answer, but just to know, any way we address this, how do you, and I think this is fundamental to the Christian life, how do you adopt and embrace a new identity? What does it take? That's been the utter challenge of Christianity for the entire existence. And not everybody, even when Jesus was walking the earth, right? A lot of people said, nah, let's do away with you. So it isn't going to be easy.
Hi, Dr. Emerson. Thanks again for your presentation. It was great. My question has to do with theologies of reconciliation and colorblindness and how your research engages those questions. So how have you seen in your research or the research of others, how has theologies of reconciliation or colorblindness been used to kind of reinforce this religion of whiteness?
Great question. I was just in actually I'm old enough now that I'm in a small Bible study group, and we're called the Well-Seasoned Group. Really means 50 and over, I guess. But a fellow professor teaches computer science where I teach currently was saying, I thought colorblindness was the way to go. And now I'm being told by my students of color that that's a bad thing. Colorblindness was the idea, right, that if we just say, I don't see color, I only see people, then it makes everything good. Why is it a problem? I don't see my cancer, I just see a healthy person. It doesn't work. You can't say it's not there. So that's the problem. It amplifies and disempowers people from being able to talk about a reality. So that's, even though I know it's well-intentioned, maybe, but it doesn't work. Colorblindness does not work. Okay, so the huge movement for reconciliation. And biblically, we are called to the ministry of reconciliation. But again, in the religion of whiteness, reconciliation gets individualized, one. It means make friends across race. And two, it gets pulled out of systems and structures, so it means as long as we're getting along, it doesn't matter what happens, if you're experiencing discrimination in your job, or if there's gross inequalities, or we're incarcerating people at very unfair rates, or you're making more money in your house than mine because of which neighborhood you live in. That's taking reconciliation and making it what it's not meant to be. So now there's been a movement either to drop the term altogether and just use justice, or others who are committed to the ministry of reconciliation to say reconciliation is first and foremost justice, as well as you would have to have justice first to be able to have reconciliation and unity, the three things we're called to. Yeah.
To piggyback on what the young lady said about factual error, my Pentecostal background is going to come out now. But
let it come out.
When we talk about the religion of whiteness, how do we go about addressing the spiritual stronghold of that and the spiritual warfare of that?
Yeah.
Because again, you showed on the slide that when that issue was presented, it went down. And so that's in lines with the factual error, that the more truth that comes, the more they buckle down, dig in. So what do you have to say about the spiritual side of that in terms of dealing with that stronghold?
Yeah, great question about the spiritual stronghold. So that's what it is, right? This is demonic, if we're just going to be honest. It is the way that Satan comes into our nation and religious people and tears us apart, which is, as I understand it, Satan's job. So, by the way, about half of Christians don't believe there is a Satan, so I'm sorry if I offended the half that don't believe that. But you can tell I'm the other half. Yeah, it is. We have to recognize that. This is, what is the verse? We battle not against flesh and blood, but powers of principalities. That's what it is. It's a principality. And it has been used to keep this nation down and to hurt others, not just in our nation, right, but globally. So that's why if we're going to try to address it, fight it, we're going to have to bond together across all the other affinity differences we might have, because it is going to come in waves and there's going to be massive pushback. And by the way, we didn't talk about this, but I once had someone say, in any religion you have kind of like the high priests, and who are they? One might be running for president again in 2024. Yeah. And I'm not trying to get political, but I'm just saying certain people embody the faith, and so they get lots and lots of attention and respect and support, because within one person you can see these things happening. So we do have the high practitioners of this faith.
Given that discussions about racism seem to drive practicing white Christians into more denial, how do you suggest we discuss reparations?
Yeah, this particular faith doesn't let you. You are shut down immediately. Reparations is a curse word, an unwholesome use of language. Really is. Yep. I think I actually have a close friend who's just finished a book on reparations. There are obviously other books on reparations. I actually think that's the next step. Like, you would have to be able to see, I'm going down the wrong path. I really need to recalculate my own life, because where it's taken me is not where God is trying to get me. Until I can start making that identity change, I don't think me trying to say reparations, I'm not going to be able to hear it. I'm going to reject it outright. And I'm going to have anger at you as well because of this influence, just defending what I am. Yep.
We, at our church, we established what we originally called the White Affinity Group. And the purpose of that group, the stated purpose, was to gather our European Lutheran Christians together and talk about our white privilege and learn about our white privilege, with the assumption that heretofore we've depended on our brethren of color to guide us. So there was logic in that, although the group itself was uncomfortable with the name White Affinity, so we changed it to Racial Justice. But your point about kind of relinquishing leadership to the peoples of color makes a lot of sense to me, but I want to see if we can reconcile those two things.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. Okay, so I go to a multiracial church in Chicago, and we were having meetings, and many of the leaders of color in our congregation said, the white folks in this church are stuck, and we need some white leaders in this church to lead a white affinity group, just like you're talking about. And we organized this. We went through a book called White Awake, and then another great book called Rediscipling the White Church, which is just fantastic. So it was so awkward. I had to stand up, because I was one of the co-leaders. I had to stand up in front of this church and say, this is a group for white people. Now, why is that awkward? Because white is universal. We don't point out that we're white in that way. And so at first, when we made it, the announcement, and had to say, people sign up by X date, nobody signed up. And so when we started just like literally calling people, shaking hands, inviting them, they would say, are you sure this is okay? Like, can we really do this? Just white people get together. I said, well, yes, because our leaders of color have asked us to do this. So, yeah, we ended up having a really productive group that we were going to do one semester, just the fall, and then it went so well, we expanded and did a next book. And then, so there are ways. And I always use this example. We go to church together, but sometimes we have like a women's Bible study and a men's Bible study. There are reasons for that. Sometimes we need that. It doesn't mean that we have separated and we're creating our own churches. It means that we're in different locations, different needs, and sometimes we have to do that. So it's okay. Yeah. I got to go wherever he says.
Hi, thank you. One of the things that's happening for me is, thank you, God, that I'm not like those people in the slides that you showed. Very aware of that, and I'm here because I really want to figure out how the religion of whiteness resides in me as a liberal, progressive Lutheran, and in my congregation as a liberal, progressive, forever, almost totally white Lutheran congregation. So I'm eager for you to challenge us. How does it show up in us? Rather than thinking that we're in this room talking about a thing that's separate.
Yeah, such a great question. Thank you. I'm sitting here thinking, I wish I had a great answer to that great question. I'm just going to use this as an example, but it's only one example. In 1998, we started studying, surveying congregations to see what percent are multiracial. So in 1998, 6% of congregations, by our definition, were multiracial. What do we mean by that? No one racial group is 80% or more. So it's not a real stringent definition, but even with that definition, just 6%. Every 6 years since then, we have been tracking if there's change. There is change. We've gone from 6% to 16%, right? So it's almost tripled. Awesome. Until you look at what's happening there. A lot of the people that we're interviewing experiencing the betrayal trauma were in those churches. Those were churches that were predominantly white that became diverse but stayed white culturally, right? And so the expectation was you're all welcome, but you need to adopt our way. And our way is the universal way. This is how Christianity is done. And folks coming are often like, that's not how I grew up. And the kind of the awkward side insults or ways they would be silenced to not actually practice Christianity as they understood it, it just kind of goes on and on until they break. So we started looking at the data, and that seismic change, really, I know it's only 16%, but to triple in 20 years is something impressive. It's all in one direction. No change in white Christians going to churches of color, 0. It's all been Christians of color making the sacrifice to go to churches that are predominantly white. Until that's not true, then we can't sit here and say, I'm good. It's still in me. Because we have to, as white folk, we got to make the sacrifice. We have to.
In your presentation, you alluded to some of the powerful narratives that seem to be woven into the religion of whiteness, of personal responsibility, and pull yourself up by your bootstraps and freedom. Do you look in your research at all on the financial interests that might be funding the reinforcement of those narratives, not perhaps based primarily on race or religion, but on tax levels and things like that, and the role that financial interests have in shaping, reinforcing, and building those narratives?
Yeah, no, we do not. That's the quick answer. But I want to say you're very much onto something, right? Because money talks in powerful ways. And the religion of whiteness organizations, the more they embrace, the more money that we tend to see comes their way. These are very, very powerful in terms of having lots of access to wealth, money, resources. Absolutely.
So Dr. Emerson, there was a request that you go back to one of your initial slides that had the scriptures.
Yeah.
That they were just looking for those references.
Yeah, and I want to
he's
say
doing
something
that-
more on that if I could too.
Yeah. While he's doing that, I will say in a few moments we're going to break for lunch, and there will be opportunities for conversation. There's table questions to facilitate that. But that question about how this toxicity of whiteness is showing up in our liberal progressive spaces, I would love for you to lead conversation at your table around that.
Yeah, it's just a great, great question. One thing I wanted to say on this, right, so we're giving them like isolated verses, right? And so if one of my sons is actually an ordained pastor, he's already pastoring a church, right? And he would say, you've got to, of course, know the context. That's how you interpret Scripture. So we followed this up, and we did what we call focus groups around the country. So we're in a circle with 5 to 10 people in various churches around the country, and we made them race-specific groups. We got their permission to film as well as to record the discussion. So we would ask these questions. And there you can get a much richer description when they didn't agree. Why? Okay, so the number one answer when they didn't agree was, well, you would have to know the context. What comes before, what comes after. Perfect. And we saw that same answer across racial groups. So we thought, there we go. That's the reason. But we went back and watched the video. Here's what we found that stunned us because we didn't see it when we were actually doing the groups. When the groups were filled with folks who are not white, different racial groups, when they said that, they would pull out their Bibles or their Bible apps and start looking and discussing the context. For the white groups, not once did anybody ever look at the context. So as we explored it more, we realized for these white practicing Christians, practicing the religion of whiteness. When they say context, it's a deflection to not have to agree with the scriptures, even though they've just told us we agree with the scriptures. So very different function, in other words. Yeah. Any other questions, or is it lunchtime?
You concluded with 2 points, which I'd really appreciate hearing again.
Sure. Fast forward. You mean the very last slide?
I think it was.
Yeah.
Something about God is doing...
Yeah. Yep. I'm going all the way because I want to make sure on the prayer here, because that first part is not mine. God will swallow up death itself. Evil cannot endure. We will dream and faithfully serve as we wait. And then, as we're called to this ministry of justice and reconciliation and ultimately unity, I truly believe we are in a time of reckoning. So if you go back to Exodus, Old Testament, eventually God says, now is enough, and everything's going to change. That's where we're at right now. That's where I believe we're at right now. He has a hand. I don't know if I'm supposed to. I guess the microphone's over here.
I get the microphone, so I'll ask a question. I guess I'm going to ask a question to find out if you agree with this observation. We have two children. They're adults now, young adults, and they've grown up in the faith, Lutheran faith, and neither of them would now be considered white practicing Christians. And I think part of it, or a good part of it, is because their observation is that the church has become so hypocritical they can't find a space. And I wonder if this is one of the reasons why our young people are running away from the church and then would be considered as part of the other 50%.
Mm-hmm. Great observation, and you're exactly right. I wrote a piece called "Goodbye, Jesus, I've got justice duty." So young folks often feel called to this idea of justice, but when they don't see it in the church, for them justice is so essential, then they say, then I'm going to leave because I've got to do justice. And that's obviously a very sad thing, but that is definitely happening.
So actually in lines with that question, when you say a number of the young people are leaving the church, do you have statistics in terms of the different generations, in terms of their mindset and the religion of whiteness?
Yeah, it's interesting, and well, I'm not going to go back, but go ahead.
Yeah, what do you see as the prevalent generational group that really holds to that mindset?
Yeah. Okay, so it's interesting. So let's go back to 2019. Remember I showed you, do you think our country has a race problem? When you break it down by millennials and Gen X and baby boomers and all that, you saw a difference among white practicing Christians, where the younger folks, majority, thought we do have a race problem. So you say, change is coming. 2020, we do it again. The biggest groups that went down were the ones that were the highest, the Gen Xers, the millennials. And then they look like everybody else. When there was pressure put on and it was harder to hold that view and they had to defend the religion of whiteness, they made the biggest change. So a lot of times, and we see this, like I remember when I was in grad school, I started reading books from the 1800s about race, and then the early 1900s. And almost every book would say, the younger generation is more progressive on the issues of race. So that, once we're all gone and the younger generation then is running the place, all will be good. But, here we are 150 or more years later, and we know that's not the case. It's because we change as we get older, because as we get older, what happens is we are more invested into the system. And the more invested we're in the system, the more we will defend it. Yeah, so I don't know if that answers it, but that's what we see.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. Perfect. Then that last question will come from me.
Okay. There was a hand back there, but that's up to you.
All right, fine.
I just wondered, when you were teaching the class to undergrads and they kind of saw what they didn't know before, did that push them to do anything about it?
I don't want to sound like a pessimist, so I'm going to, yes, it did. I mean, they would be very upset. How could I have not seen this before? And some truly make change. I'm going to describe to you, though, that's my anecdotal evidence. There's actually a professor that's decided to study this. And what she did is she would teach these race and ethnic classes, and they would learn all about how economic inequality has come because of different laws put into place that some families benefited and other families didn't. And she said they would all agree and be horrified by it, and then she would make an assignment at the end, and this is what she would analyze, and she's been doing it over the last 7 years now. The assignment was, go to your parents, so that it's during a break, go to your parents and ask them if any of these laws they've ever been able to access, any of these rulings or policies or mortgage type things that were available only to certain people. And then if your grandparents are living, talk to them. And if your great-grandparents are living, talk to them. So when they came back, they write a paper about it, and she said, white folks in the white students in my class had 6 times more advantage of these things that we had studied. Their families were able to access and have the benefit. And so they would write about them and say and acknowledge, we have truly benefited from these unequally. But she said what stunned her was they don't then accept and say this is a bad thing. They defend their family and their position. 4 different ways, I won't remember all 4, but a couple of them are how blessed we are. So just okay with that. Like, our family's been very fortunate and we're grateful for that. Another one is what we call, it's sort of the myth of moral goodness. My co-author will use that term. He's African American. He says whites have this myth that whites can do no wrong. And that was the second theme. It was, if my family would have known this was racially unjust, they would have never accessed those benefits. Okay. So anyway, you get the picture. There were 4 of those kind of methods to deflect, and so that they didn't have to actually deal with that inequality, just accepted it. Yeah. Anything else?
Before I ask my final question of you, Dr. Emerson, I just want to, this notion that if your ancestors had known better, they would have done better. So many gasps. We're going to meet Dr. Kelly Sherman Conroy this afternoon, but among other things, Kelly and I do a lot of talking to a lot of white churches all across the state and the country. That notion that if your ancestors knew better, they would have done better, we hear that all the time. And you're not fooling us. Just be honest. Just be honest. So, Dr. Emerson, my final question for you, as pertains to the white church, white American church, someone who I'm sure you're very familiar with, Dr. Soon-Chan Rah, says that maybe for the white church, for white Christianity, it's time that we stop sitting hospice and just attend the funeral. Mm-hmm. And my question for you is, rather than trying to do all the work to reform, do we let it die and believe in resurrection?
Wow. You already got the answer from that clapping. Look, if I'm being honest, and in my heart of hearts, I don't believe you can reform the white church in America. I don't believe it. I think it's too far entrenched and dug in, despite the very best intentions of lots of people across those congregations. And I think the only true answer, as I mentioned a little before, is, okay, I am going to a church where people of color are leading, and that is going to be my church. Until we have a mass wave of that, we will keep having what we have. Okay. Thank you so much.
Incredible gratitude, Dr. Emerson. Thank you very much.